everyone. Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast, where we chat openly about creativity, personal growth, and building a career in the arts. I'm Michelle Manette.
And I'm Robyn Lester.
And this is episode 35, and today we will be talking about rest. But first, as always, we will do our little check-in, where we each share a win, a fun or interesting thing, and then something we appreciate. Did you want to kick us off there, Robyn?
Yes, I do.
Well, you have no choice, so that's great.
Okay.
I'm glad to hear it.
I don't have a win this week, but I have a fun and interesting thing, and something I'm grateful for is rolled into one, and that is Mike and I went to see Shane Koyczan last week. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a spoken word poet.
Yes, I think you mentioned him before, perhaps, in an earlier
interesting.
episode.
Well,
maybe?
I mean, I've been following his work for like over 10 years, and I did in early COVID, like 2021, I think, he did like a online writing workshop for like, it was great. So I managed to get a spot with that, and there was like only 10 other people or something like that. So it was cool to kind of learn more about his process and learn from him. Anyways, so we went to see him, and it's our second time seeing him live. He's great. Like his writing is phenomenal, and his delivery is so great, and his shows, like, it's such a great mix of, because his stuff is heavy, like he's dealing with really heavy topics, but he does a really good job of mixing the humor in with the heaviness, and so it doesn't drain you. Anyways, I have a lot of respect for him, and I think ultimately he's doing everyone a service. Like, I seen him on stage, and he's talking about, like, right now, I think the thing that's top of mind for him is the death of his grandmother, who he was very, very close with, and his grandparents raised him. And he's tearing up and getting emotional as he's reciting these poems. And I'm thinking, like, how hard that must be, because he's touring right now. And I'm like realizing that these wounds are still raw, and he goes on stage and he continues to open these wounds up, because he knows that people find comfort in shared experiences, and grief is a shared experience. Like, we can all relate in some way, right? And just kind of feeling like, this guy is doing a public service, but it's framed as art, like it's it was really, really great to see him, and I have a lot of appreciation for what he does.
Yeah, I'll make sure to add a link in the show notes so everybody can go check him out.
Your turn.
My turn. I do have a win. So I had a really nice conversation with one of my students that was very validating this past week.
Oh, good.
And basically, he was just saying that he felt like he was getting a lot of value from our lessons. And
nice.
That was really encouraging for me, especially on the heels of just having finished reading a book called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. Hopefully I'm saying his last name right, but it's an excellent book. And it was just all about, giving people more than they expect, and operating from this place of generosity and curiosity and creativity and in just everything you do. And it really resonated with me and really inspired me to look for ways to do that with my teaching. And I felt internally like I was on the right track, because it felt so good. Like, it felt like, when something just lines up just right, and you're like, oh, like this hits right. This feels like I'm engaging in this in the right way. But to have that external validation was really, like, I really appreciated that. And my fun/interesting thing, I got this game last night. It went on sale. It was $6. It's one that's
Sweet.
on my wish list for a while. A stoic friend of mine recommended it to me. It's called Endling, Extinction is Forever. So it's kind of a sad game.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound particularly uplifting.
No, it's not really fun. So I mean, I'm enjoying playing it. It's a very, like, simple game, and it's kind of what I want right now. I don't have to commit a lot of time to it. I mean, I've only played an hour so far, so maybe there's more to it than I've experienced so far. But it seems pretty standard. It has like a Don't Starve vibe.
Yeah,
where you have, except you're not out during the day, you're out at night. And you have like the nighttime to go get. So the basic premise is that you play as this fox who is in, it seems like some sort of Armageddon post-apocalyptic kind of setting. Like you start the game, and so mild spoilers for Endling. You start the game in this forest that's like on fire, and so you're running through. It's sort of like the tutorial where you're learning how to move your character and interact with the environment and all of that. And you end up falling off a cliff and sort of stumbling off and finding this little lair. And so freaking sad. Like this fox lays down in this lair. She's all hurt. Like a single tear falls from her eye. I was like, oh no, what have I done? But then she gives birth to these 4 little fox cubs.
Aww.
And so the whole premise of the game is that you're trying to care for these cubs. And so you have to spend the nighttime going to collect food to feed them. So you can find rabbits and rats, and you can dig through garbage, which you have to be careful because if you dig through and you get a bag stuck on your head, you have to get it off before you suffocate. So it's like the stakes feel very high.
Man.
But there's also stuff that can happen too. So like, again, mild spoilers. After the second night, one of your cubs gets kidnapped. A scavenger lures it out of the den with some sort of like a squeaky toy, and then gets kidnapped. So you need to follow this scent trail to figure out what happened, but you don't get the cub right away. I think it's like, that might even be like the end of the game. I don't know yet, but I'm at night 11 and I still don't have the cub back, but I've accumulated these little scent memories. So it's pretty high stakes because some nights you'll get more clues. And so I'm trying to follow these clues while also not getting like attacked by badgers or having like an owl take one of my babies. So there's all these, and then I have to remember to feed the babies too. So I'll notice their food meter is getting down. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta feed them. But then you also have to make it back to the lair by the end of the night. So
this all sounds stressful.
It's a little bit, yeah. It's it again has very much the don't starve vibes, but with the added pressure of child care and child rearing. But it's interesting. It's a beautiful game. Like the artwork is stunning and the music is gorgeous. Like it's a really wonderful experience to play it, even as I'm stressed. But again, I'm only playing for like an hour at a time, or that's my plan going forward. So it's not, it's nice for the time I'm playing it, but it's also not a game I can get sucked into, which is great again for me right now. I have so many other things that I want to be doing. I don't really want to lose, 3, 4, 5 hours on a weekend. I'd rather just have an hour, a couple of days through the week, and that's good enough. But yeah, it's a really well received game as well. I think the ratings on Steam are overwhelmingly positive.
Cool.
And my appreciation bit is really just for guitar. I'm trying these days to just be way more appreciative of the things that are in my life that I potentially take for granted. And I feel like because I'm doing guitar every single day, it's easy for me to just pick it up, practice, and then that's it. And so I'm really trying to tap into that appreciation. So I really felt a lot of that this week. And it just, I've been on my guitar journey now for 23 years, and it's still so exciting to me, and I still love playing it. So I really appreciate having the guitar in my life, having it be such a big part of what I do musically. Yeah, that's it. All right, let's jump into the main topic of rest. So I had actually made some notes. I wrote out a few prompt questions, and one of them was, what is rest exactly and why is it important? And I had a few notes, but I saw your notes and they seem much more scientific and concise and clear. So maybe you want to start us off and talk about your notes there, the types of rest.
The scientific notes. Yeah, well, so this is something that I had come across a long time ago. Like it was, I saw things on Instagram about it or whatever, and like the 7 different types of rest. And I've always thought it was quite interesting. So if you aren't familiar with this already, do some Googling. I took some stuff off the internet to just kind of do a quick recap, but the 7 types being physical rest, which is what you would think. So, signs that you need physical rest are you lack physical energy, you're frequently sick, you have physical soreness or whatever. So that's physical rest is, sleeping, napping, giving your body a break. If you've been working out a lot, what people would typically expect rest to mean. But it gets interesting because then there's things. So mental rest, which would be, you would need mental rest if you lacked mental energy, if you're experiencing brain fog or irritability. And mental rest would be, you know, taking breaks, slowing down, having mindful minutes throughout your workday, etc. Then sensory rest, which I think we can all relate to. So if you're feeling eye strain, or you're becoming very sensitive to loud sounds or brightness, or just feeling general overwhelm, you may need to give yourself some sensory rest, which, you know, avoiding screens would be is the big thing for me, where it's like, okay, just I need to avoiding screens and avoiding those, what is it called? Like when you're on Instagram and you're flipping through and there's just like this constant, just short form videos and stuff like that, right? Like what do you call that? I think avoiding those like little dopamine hits.
I think just what you said is perfect. Like this really like short form content, the stuff that it's a blip and then another blip and another blip. Yeah, because actually what that does is that's inducing all this context switching for your brain, which makes you exhausted.
Yeah. So sensory rest, I think that's something that we all need a lot of and probably aren't getting enough of. And then there's creative rest, which signs you may need creative rest include, you know, the things that used to light you up just don't anymore, or you have trouble brainstorming, feel like you don't have any free time in the day. So creative rest can involve like engaging in activities that refill the creative bucket, or activities that kind of spark passion for you. Emotional rest is an interesting one. Signs that you might need it is, you know, you may have a lot of anxiety stemming from people pleasing. You may feel a lot of self-doubt, or you're overly concerned with what people think of you. And you can kind of get that emotional rest by like practicing authenticity and being honest and saying no to things that you don't want to do or that don't serve you, which is a very challenging thing to do, especially for women as the primary caregivers of children, etc. And then social rest is the sixth one. Signs you may need it if you're feeling lonely, or you're feeling detached from friends and family, or people just generally drain you. And social rest might include cutting out people who are toxic, spending time specifically with people who make you feel good about yourself, or who kind of help re-energize you. And then spiritual rest, which is like signs you may need spiritual rest, is sort of if you're feeling hopeless or helpless or lack motivation. And you can kind of get spiritual rest by engaging in activities that give you a sense of belonging or a sense of community. So recap, there's physical rest, mental rest, sensory rest, creative rest, emotional rest, social rest, and spiritual rest. And what's kind of interesting with each of these, there's passive actions, or there's more active actions that you take. So that's kind of an interesting concept. I noticed in your notes that you'd use that language too, like the passive and the active rest. But yeah, just a different way of thinking about rest that might be helpful, because I think we tend to think of rest as being passive. And there's a lot of times in which it's more active. And I think we tend to think of rest as being sleeping or napping, or like just lying on the couch binge watching TV. But sometimes rest involves going out and seeing a friend, or going out and taking a walk in nature, or what have you. So it kind of helps. I think it gives you like these categories of rest, give you a bit more to work with, so that you can actually figure out, what do I actually need? What will help fill my bucket and make me feel better? Because to just tell someone you need to go rest, like it just, you need a break from that, or you need rest from that. That's not super, we don't always know what that means.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you know, how somebody feels hungry and eats, but really what their body needs is water. It's like learning how to differentiate between the different needs, your different rest needs.
Yeah.
Because if what you're craving is social rest, but you're just giving yourself, you know, physical rest, you know, at some point, perhaps it reaches a point of diminishing returns where you can only rest so much, but if you're not actually addressing the correct issue, you're not really going to feel fully recharged. You know, you could be getting 10 hours of sleep a night and resting a ton, but if you never engage with people who lift you up and fill you up, and you aren't engaging in activities that do that as well, you're still going to feel like something is missing.
Yeah, exactly. it was interesting going through this list too, because I'm like, I can see the ones that are needed for me, like sensory is for sure, and emotional and creative. And so it's kind of interesting to go through that and see the areas where I need to do some active work to rest.
Yeah. I always really appreciate this degree of clarity and specificity, because I can see where I'm needing, because sensory is one I hadn't even thought about as being its own thing, but it makes absolute sense. Like sometimes I just feel so overwhelmed with like from my senses.
Yeah.
And I was actually yesterday I was trying to read and there was some noise in the hall. It was one of my neighbors speaking really loudly and a child running down the hallway, and I plugged my ears and it felt so good to just block out the world. And it actually it reminded me of these earplugs you can get. And I think I'd like to get a pair, and it just helps to block out the outside world. I just immediately felt so much calmer just to reduce. I think I'm very sensitive to auditory sensations. And I don't know if that's...
I am too.
Like I just heard the fridge come on. It's like immediately my ears like there's a sound. There's a sound. And so I'd love some way to just block the sound. And I've tried like white noise apps and things like that, but I find, I don't know, that bothers my ears. And I'm always worried about putting my ears under that kind of constant noise, because I don't know that would do damage, but I'm just very sensitive to having my ears be exposed to sounds for a long period of time. So I like the idea of just having something that blocks out the sound. But yeah, that's something that I know that's something I can address.
The sensory overload. I remember like when I worked at the preschool, and on those first couple of weeks when I was in the toddler room. So for a lot of those kids, it was their first time being away from their mom for the day. And so for the first couple of weeks as they adjusted, it was a classroom of crying children. Just constantly. And like you might have a couple kids crying and then they would cry themselves out and then 3 more kids would start. And it was just all day crying. And I remember there was one afternoon where we had them lying down to nap, and we would kind of just like pat their backs until they would sort of fall asleep. And I just remember sitting there and I was just silently weeping because I was so tired from all of the noise for hours straight, right? You don't have a break from it. And you can't turn it off. You can't reason with them and tell them to stop crying. You can't do anything because they're just a little kid and they don't know what's happening, and they're feeling all the feelings, you know? But man, like that. So for parents out there, you probably need some rest from sensory overwhelm.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
That was my most intense experience of it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that list. I'm going to make note of it and I think do a little reflection on where I need some adjustments.
It reminds me a bit of that. I don't know what it's called. Is it called the Wheel of Life? Like there's different, where you mark where you feel on the different, and it kind of reminds me of that a little bit, you know? And it's, I think, a good thing to kind of keep in mind, and like doing sort of like an inventory every like 4 months or whatever, like, okay, where do I need rest? And like kind of looking through this list and checking in.
Yeah, I did something kind of like that when I started the Artist's Way back in March. And out of curiosity, I did another one just within the last month to see what had changed. And almost everything improved, except there's one area which was already like as high as it could go. And then there's one area which was very low and is still very low. But I feel like every other area improved in ways I hadn't expected as well. So it was really interesting to take that time to reflect and go, oh, I improved in this area, but it was in a totally different way, because you have these assumptions about how certain needs need to be met, and just being able to go, actually, I found a way to meet those needs better in a way I hadn't expected. So it was a really fun exercise. I think this is something I might like to do as part of, that kind of reflection is, not just how are the different areas of my life, but how are the different rest areas of my life.
Yeah.
And especially if I'm feeling out of balance too. Because I can see it as I've done work over the years in just trying to feel better, how I actually tacked a lot of these areas without realizing it. Like the spiritual one is a big one where I now have my daily journaling and reflection, and I study philosophy and all of that. And that was something I was doing more out of interest and curiosity, but it's become such an essential part of my ongoing healing and wellness and well-being and all of that. And creative, like I was telling you before we started recording, how I'm feeling so called these days to do more creating, and how it's just, I'm finding all these ways to just make things or try things, and it's really lifting me up, and it really can leave you feeling super energized. And it's like, it is so interesting just to break it down that way. Otherwise it becomes sort of like when we talked about self-love last week, like it becomes this kind of nebulous idea and people have a vague idea of what it is. But when you can really articulate what it is you're needing, it makes it much easier to take action.
Yeah. And it also is helpful too, because it kind of gives you, I mean, we're all really good at identifying like we haven't slept enough and we need to sleep more.
Yeah.
And giving ourselves permission to do that. And I think what I like about this list is like something like with emotional rest, and seeing that giving yourself emotional rest means saying no to things that you don't. It's helpful because all of a sudden you feel like you have permission to actually say no, you know? It's I think it's helpful in encouraging you to take action and to have agency in your own life.
Yeah. Yeah, that one really resonated with me as well, like the being honest and authentic.
Yeah.
So I think so many of us will work ourselves to the point of complete overwhelm and exhaustion and stress, because then that becomes something Cal Newport talks about. That becomes then the thing we can use to justify saying no to something. But rather than getting to that point or feeling like we have to get to that point before we can say no, like, oh, I'm too busy, I'm too stressed out, you engage with yourself honestly enough to know what your limitations are. And then you're able to establish, I don't say yes to these things under these conditions, or I don't say yes to these things at all. You know, so you can set better. It's like knowing yourself better helps you set better boundaries so that you're not getting to the red zone before you can do something.
Well, I think also just being honest and authentic, it makes it easier to say no as well. Because I think when you're honest and authentic, it means that you have stopped caring what people think about you. And because I think you can't be honest and authentic if you care too much about what people think, because you will start to self-censor and you'll start to project a certain image of yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're able to be those two things, then saying no it stops being a problem. Because it's like, if people are mad at you for saying no, it's like, well, whatever. Like this is where I'm at. I can't do this. I don't need to give a reason. I just don't want to right now, for, you know, and that's the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, just if you're living with any kind of dishonesty or you're lacking that depth of connection with yourself, I feel like, this is me very much speaking from experience, that's a really exhausting experience on its own. Just not ever really being fully in touch with yourself, with what you want, with who you are. I feel like that is like a day-to-day state of being really wears away at you, or it certainly did for me. And a big part of my healing journey has been about really tapping into myself and getting to know myself and what my actual limitations are and wants are and all of that. And then, by extension, in the physical world, it makes it so much easier for me to establish boundaries with myself and then with others.
Yeah.
Yeah, and learning to accept that people are going to react the way they react. That's something I really struggle with. But I'm trying to get to that place where I stand in my authenticity, and if they don't like it, that is a reflection of them. That I need to just let that go. Their reaction is theirs. They're allowed to have it, but I don't have to take that on.
Yeah, yeah.
In a couple of the other notes I made about rest that I found really helpful to remember is that rest is just a natural part of life and nature. And you can see it reflected in nature in the way that, vegetation will lay dormant. So grass goes to sleep under the snow, and maybe it doesn't go to sleep. I don't know. I'm not a grass scientist.
It goes
I don't know.
dormant.
It goes dormant. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how it works exactly, but yeah, it's, it has to survive, and same with trees. Obviously, they lose their leaves and all of that, and animals hibernate, and so we have seasons. So it's the way our world, our planet is designed. It's part of how we operate, and when we don't operate from that place, we all know it does pretty terrible things to us. You can think about rest in different intervals as well. So you have the rest that you can engage in just within a day. So it's really helpful to have some meaningful periods of rest during the day. And then during the week, I mean, that's the idea behind a weekend. It's not always the case where you can actually get a proper restful weekend, but it's ideally what you'd do is have some time to disengage each week, maybe over the course of a month, and then over the course of a year or multiple years or whatever. So you can have these different timescales where you are building in some kind of rest. And I know a lot of that is just going to be dependent on the kind of work you do and how much autonomy you have, of course. But, as much as you can manage to take, take it.
That's one thing that kind of struck me was, because in the work I do, like in the nonprofit, and I'm coming into contact with teachers and students. There's been so many teachers who've been on stress leave since COVID. I'm constantly seeing people on LinkedIn talking about burnout and exhaustion, chronic exhaustion, and all of that thing. And going through this list, and I was kind of thinking about it a bit more this morning, and realizing like the modern workplace is not set up to provide any opportunity for rest throughout the day. You have no opportunity for mental rest, particularly if you're working nonprofit, because you're wearing all the hats and you're doing the job of 5 people. There's no time. Mm-hmm. There's no time to, okay, I'm going to give myself 10-minute break from the screen. It just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. You're being pulled in a million different directions. And same with teachers, and then sensory, like our whole world is sensory overload now. And the modern workplace now, like you have your work chat channel or whatever. So little things popping up, you have your mm-hmm. emails coming in, you have video calls coming in, you have all these things constantly throughout the day. And then you just have the nature of social media too, right? Like that's an element on your off time that is sensory overload. And like thinking like compared to the 90s when the internet was just out, right? And like, because I think about like how hard my dad worked, and it's like, how is it that he managed never to burn out? And it's like, well, because they were operating in a time where like you couldn't reach out to someone or connect with someone within the day necessarily. Mm-hmm. There wasn't that level of connection, nor was it expected. But now you're in an environment where not only is it possible to connect with someone the instant you need to connect with them, it's now also expected that you're always available.
Mm-hmm. That's it. That's it.
And exactly. So then now you have this situation where your context shifting, like you were mentioning before, all the time throughout your workday, which is a whole other level of exhaustion introduced. So just kind of realizing like it was a bit eye-opening, because I'm like, I'm giving myself a hard time because after work, all I want to do is shut down, and I don't have the energy or the enthusiasm for the things that for the creative activities or for reading or for whatever. And it's like, well, no wonder, because I don't get that luxury, because I work at a job where I don't have like to get that kind of rest that I need. It's just not always a possibility. And you start to look around you and look at the people who are dissatisfied with life. And like, it's really a shame, because like the reason I think that there's so much dissatisfaction with life is that we just don't have the energy outside of work to participate in the things that would really fuel us. And the reason we don't have that energy is because of work itself.
Yeah.
And because of the nature of work. It was quite eye-opening, and kind of realizing too, like with rest, there's an element of privilege there that doesn't apply to everyone.
Absolutely.
And like, I'm acknowledging, like, I have a job that is draining for various reasons, but, I'm privileged in that I can come home and I don't have children to care for.
Yeah.
like I think of other people who are working demanding jobs and then have children, or are working demanding jobs caring for children but are also underpaid, so they have the financial strain as well, right? So there's all these things that like it's too bad, but like rest is a privilege that we don't all have. Just really quite sad.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely am guilty of forgetting about my privilege of having so much autonomy in what I do, being able to be so deliberate and to structure my days so that there is ample time for rest. Like, that's an incredible gift. And I remember what it was like to not have that, and how difficult it was, how much of a slog it was to get through the evening.
Yeah.
You know, I was engaging in practicing, which I loved, but I was so exhausted. And which is actually why I think we need to scrap the whole idea of homework. I think homework is stupid. Even, you know, however many years I am out of school, I think about that because I have students who are school aged. And I think about how exhausting it is for them to be in school all day, especially now, especially with digital, with so much of education being, you know, on computers, on screens, all of that. And then they have to go home and do more. It's just our brains and bodies aren't designed to work as much as they do. And we're just not thinking about how brains actually operate. And so we're expecting it's sort of like, this is an analogy that Cal Newport uses a lot, where it's like giving your star athletes like cigarettes and whiskey or something like that, you know, and expecting them to perform at a high level. Like, you know, we have a world of knowledge workers, whether, you know, you're working in an office or whatever. That's essentially what most people are doing these days. And in school, you're doing the same thing. You are trying to produce value with your brain. And that means you have to understand how the brain works, and it is not functioning under the current system.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. And I do find it a little bit, you know, workplaces will talk about mental wellness and how to foster mental wellness with their employees, blah, 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 blah. It's all well-meaning, but it feels like lip service. And it's like, because the thing that will actually help us feel well within the workplace is having those breaks.
Yes.
And having those pauses from the constant notifications and stuff like that, right?
Well,
like,
actually completely restructuring work. The way work is being done, you know, where you have that constant interruption. You have the, what does Cal call it? The hyperactive hive mind. Is how he talks about workplaces. He has a great book called A World Without Email that addresses a lot of this. And he actually talked about, I think in one country, just to bring it back to what you were saying about people being reachable all the time and how we have this expectation where people will answer right away. I think he talked about a country that passed a law where you can't send work emails like past 5 p.m. or something.
Right.
Like there's actually a law in place. And I'm like that's how bad it got.
You have to be really boundary. Like I am someone, I do not check work email after hours or before hours. And that is something that not everyone does. And I think it's a slippery slope if you start working beyond your hours. I've always been very strong on that.
Good.
The other thing that like my workplace implemented that has been really nice is no meeting Friday afternoons. So Friday afternoons, you can't have any meetings. And I mean, like sometimes there's external meetings and that's different, but internally, no internal meetings. And that's been hugely helpful because it's a forced focus time. And I think that's the other thing that needs to be implemented, you know, like or at least normalized. It's like, if I have focus time blocked off in my calendar, you're not contacting me.
Yeah.
And I think that's another, but there's a lot of things that can be implemented that would be helpful. It's just, it's normalizing that stuff, right?
Yes,
and I think some organizations are better with that than others. And it's hard too to kind of implement that stuff when the nature of your work is collaborative as well. Like that can be tricky. So yeah, I mean, hopefully in the coming years, there will be more work done around this, because it is, the modern workplace. And I think particularly in the knowledge sector, like when I worked retail or service, it was tiring physically because you're on your feet all day. And there'd be a bit of the sensory overload if you're talking to a lot of people and stuff like that. But I did not feel the same level of drain that I feel from just the constant, like, mental overload is extremely draining.
Yeah, because you need your brain for everything you do. So if you're mentally exhausted, that's it. Which is why you have people who are struggling to make use of their evening hours, because you might have the physical energy, and in some cases people don't. And it's like they don't have either. But if you're like, oh, I feel like I could do something, but I'm so fried that then all they want to do is binge watch a show or sit and scroll, which just makes you more tired. Not so much with watching a show. If you're sitting down and watching a show, I think that can be a great way to recover some energy if you're doing it deliberately. But, certainly the people who are so tired and so they turn to this thing that is only making them more tired.
Yeah. It becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, of course, like, what do you expect? Yeah. The state of work and the state of rest are not great.
No, they don't really mesh.
No. No, I think we need a revolution.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think things are going to shift going forward. They have to.
Well, it's interesting because my concern is the way they're shifting is going down to the 4-day work week. But that doesn't really address the root cause of some of the issues, right? Like,
exactly.
It would be nice, I'm not going to lie, like a 3-day weekend. But let's ask, like, why do we need a 3-day weekend? Well, 2 days isn't enough. Well, why is 2 days not enough? Well, because, that's not enough for me to feel rested. The 2 days is what it takes for me to get back to operating. Okay, well, then there's a larger issue here that needs to be addressed. Absolutely. And cramming the work week into 4 days, I think is going to create
more stressful.
Like now you're having to do the same amount of work that you do in 5 days, but you need to do it in 4 days. I think in a lot of cases, it's not that your hours are less, it's that you're working longer days. Mm-hmm. So you're working an 8 to 6 versus a 9 to 5 or whatever. So I'm not convinced that is the long-term solution.
I agree.
There's other stuff at play here. And I think it becomes, one of the people I work with now is really good at doing this, where like she closes her Teams chat and she closes her email. So when she's focusing on something, you can't reach her.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that she does that, because it's given me permission to do the same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's amazing. So I think the first step is being aware, and the second step is to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
and advocate for your mental needs in the workplace. And then that gives permission for other people to do the same thing. And we all kind of want to. I think that's the other thing.
You just need somebody to be the one to go
first. You need someone to start the trend.
Yeah. Again, I'm at the risk of sounding like a broken record. I'm okay with that. Cal Newport is such a great person to go to for that stuff, because this is what he does. He talks about work and the role of technology and work, and a lot of the things you're talking about, it's exactly what he says. Like, you have to restructure it. You need that deep work time. He has his book called Deep Work, and that's what you're doing when you shut off all the distractions and you give yourself a focus block. You give yourself that chance. You give your brain that chance to really sink into what it's doing. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes for your brain to get into a rhythm with what you're working on. And so if you're constantly being interrupted and you're context switching and you're introducing all of this attention residue, every time you go back to your work, that's another 15 to 20 minutes you need before you can get back into that. And it's what he calls productivity poison. But then also, again, it drains your energy. So it's not only, it's making you less productive to have the constant interruptions. It's also making you miserable and tired. So it's like your work is bad, your rest is bad. And so it's like about needing to restructure work so that work is better and so that rest can be better too. Rest can be what it fully needs to be.
And I think generally our expectations of ourselves and each other are too high in the workplace.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, again, that's where you need to understand how human brains and human bodies actually work so that we can have the proper expectations.
And, I have a lot of concerns with AI. And one of them is like people are talking about how to leverage AI to do more work in the workplace. And it's like, oh man, because now we're legit working like machines, because we have this program or whatever you call it that can enable that kind of speed of work. I don't think that improves equality. And I don't think we need to be moving in the direction of doing more work.
No.
Like, if you're going to use AI to make your work and your processes faster, then that time you save should be your time now.
100%.
Not time that you use to do more work.
Yeah, I think what we should be doing is just working at a more natural pace.
Yeah.
So that we're doing only as much work as we are capable of doing, whether that's in a single day or in like a season. So having the expectation that, you're going to have slower seasons. And this is, I know there are some workplaces that do this where they will have, and maybe there's a specific one that I cannot recall the name of, where they will have a bit of like a sprint where they have a project. And then after that, they get breaks. They get like a couple of weeks to take the time to stop and just rest and reflect and think. Because if you're constantly just going, you never have a chance to recharge or to think about what you were doing or to make some changes or whatever. There's no time for reflection, and it's depriving us of the full experience of life.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't reflect nature. It doesn't reflect how anything else in nature operates. You know, can you imagine trying to use AI to make trees make leaves the whole year? Like make more leaves all year? That's just stupid. You wouldn't expect that. And yet, like you said, like we have these unrealistic expectations about how people need to be producing value.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, the math doesn't math.
The math doesn't math. Yes.
So I'll quickly go through. I had made a list of some of the different parts of my experience with rest, because I have sort of a 3-stage journey with rest. So I went through the period where I was just not getting enough rest. That was the I'll sleep when I'm dead phase.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I rest is for the weak and all that other nonsense. So I was, going to bed late at this time, but I was still getting up early. I was, driving my body into the ground, doing like HIIT workouts at 5 a.m. I would feel guilty anytime I did take time off. I would feel guilty for not being productive or not doing something. When I was doing work, even if it was work I enjoyed, I was exhausted. I was a struggle to get through. I was in a terrible mood. I was a terrible person to be around. Let's just be honest about that. I was trying to squeeze as much value as possible out of each day. So like I felt like every second I had to be doing something. Again, that tied into me feeling guilty when I wasn't doing something.
Yeah.
This is what I talked about earlier too. Like I was too tired to do something, so I was mindlessly engaged in these passive and I would say also destructive activities. So that would be like scrolling social media or flipping between emails or, just looking for that constant like dopamine hit, that constant information. Yeah. So it's like when I was resting, I wasn't really resting. I wasn't really getting what I needed. This was also too where I was having issues with my identity. So I was really attaching my sense of worth to this identity as like an intense, disciplined, hardworking person. And it's where I refused. Again, this is where I wasn't experiencing that honesty because I was rejecting the parts of me that are human, all the parts of me, and recognizing that I could be somebody who likes to work hard, but also who wants to engage in meaningful, restful activities. So that was still I was very split. I was looking at life through this binary lens. And this went on for a really long time. And it's probably starting in 2021, as I was starting to get to a point where I was maybe starting to change my mind. I actually have this postcard on my desk that Courtney sent me, and it says, "Rest early, rest often, rest for longer than you think you need." And she had written it like as a reminder for Michelle, who works so hard. Because I think at this point, I was starting to talk about how, well, maybe I should start actually scheduling rest time. Remember, I was doing that. I was like scheduling time, like where I would go play a game. I put it on my calendar because I'm like, I gotta do it. So I was trying to incorporate more restful, meaningful activity into my time, and so I keep that reminder on my desk. And then the second stage was where I started taking rest more seriously, but for a purpose. It was to support my music, to support my growth as a person and the life I wanted to live and all of that. So this is where I got really interested in, the idea of like stress plus rest equals growth. This is Peak Performance. This was Essentialism by Greg McKeown. He really talks about the importance of sleep and rest and play and things like that. And so I was taking it, really seriously, but it was still more not for its own sake. It was just because I wanted to do better at the things I wanted to do better in.
Yeah, it's like the rest in itself was a productivity hack.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which was really helpful because it certainly the alternative, it was better than the alternative, which is I was just not resting enough. So now there was actually some incentive for me, so it ended up being a bit of a bridge. Again, this was like where I tapped into Cal Newport and deep work and digital minimalism, although he was definitely one who inspired me to enjoy it more, because he talks a lot about having high quality leisure in his book, Digital Minimalism. So you're not just disconnecting from digital distractions and technology. You're doing it so that you can do things you enjoy, so that you can have the experience of awe in the world, and you can appreciate things and be present and enjoy solitude and all of that. So that was sort of also starting to tip me in the other direction into stage 3, but that's sort of where I had to start. You know, it's where I started listening to my body, and I started recognizing that if I was feeling like I was almost at the point of burnout, which during stage 1 I was constantly burnt out, if I started feeling that happen, I would pull back and go, well, I know it's not going to help me. If I'm exhausted, I need to give myself some time so that I can come back tomorrow and be able to function. So then the third stage, which is where I am now, still relatively recent, but I have good footing as far as rest goes now, but it's just for its own sake. So I'm thinking in terms of how do I fully enjoy the moments where I am engaging in rest, whether it's active or passive or whatever. I'm trying to get the most out of that because I want that moment to be something I enjoy. I want to be present for it. So, you know, I'm improving the quality of those things, not because I think I'm going to get more of a return in my productivity, but because I recognize that it is something I deserve as a person. It is something I deserve to enjoy my life, and I'm allowed to tap into what I want and what I want to do just for the sake of it. So I am following my intuition more. I'm trying to give myself more space to make decisions in the moment. So there was a time when I was, like I said, more structured in my rest time, where I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Now I give myself time, and then I have some more flexibility so I can kind of just decide what I want to do in the moment. You know, and that means doing nothing if I don't want to do anything. I spend a lot of time just sitting and just thinking, or just looking at the cat, or just doing, you know, and kind of just spending the time existing and just being. And so I am structured in the sense that I have rest built into my life now. It is like a non-negotiable part of my life. I don't feel the need anymore to add extra work into my evenings to try to get more out of the day. I have a cutoff time when I don't do any more work, and then that's it. And then anything that doesn't get done gets put to the next day or gets put somewhere else in my schedule. And a lot more time for solitude and reflecting and getting to know myself better, accepting who I am and how my body and brain work, and accepting the natural rhythms of things. I'm sort of taking life at a slower pace, thinking more of rest as a sign of respect for myself as well. Like it's a way that I demonstrate self-respect. I'm firmly now rejecting the idea of needing to earn rest. I don't think it's something you have to earn. It is a birthright. It's something that Chase Jarvis in his book, Never Play It Safe, calls a feature of being a human, not a bug. That's basically about it. That's where I'm at right now with
that. Some of that resonates. And I think for me, I'm kind of, and again, like I've talked about this, where I'm sort of rejecting that kind of like productivity mindset. Because in my mind, I think like I have a responsibility to meet my basic needs. So, which involves working to support myself, right? And beyond that, you know, to deny myself the freedom to rest, whether that's participating in things that fuel me up or whatever, however that looks, is kind of a slap in the face to anyone who doesn't have that luxury.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
And so I kind of feel like it's a responsibility. Like I need to do that, because to not do that and to intentionally cause yourself harm, which is essentially what you're doing if you're denying yourself this rest, it's insulting to people who are in a position where they can't take care of themselves in that way for whatever reason. So it's not just a way of honoring my own needs. It's also a way of, it's almost like an act of gratitude. Like I am at a point in my life where I can do these things. I have this freedom or have this time or whatever. And I'm going to express my gratitude for that by taking advantage of it and not feeling guilty, which helps kind of give permission somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. First of all, the idea of that, you know, that sense of responsibility and then gratitude, because you build that into your experience when you are making rest a priority. And I think too, it's really important if what we want is widespread change, it has to build. So it's great when people start doing that and start taking ownership of their rest, having that agency, but then it has to continue. So more people have to do it. If we want some kind of proper cultural and structural shift, there has to be enough people where that becomes the expectation. So it's almost like a grander responsibility to that movement. It's a very slow one. It's the kind of thing that, it's long term, and we have to have, a good time horizon for it. But in whatever ways we can in our lives, make that become active participants in our rest, I think we need to do that. And, I think things will eventually have to change, because people are also going to have different expectations about work. So some workplaces are going to start to shift to accommodate that. They're going to restructure how work is done so that people are able to get the rest they need and work in a way that actually works. And that's going to be the kind of jobs that people go for. People aren't going to put up with a job where it's just a hyperactive hive mind, where they're constantly expected to engage on Slack or email or text or whatever, and they're exhausted and they don't have time to actually get their work done because they're always in meetings and whatever. And people are going to look for other jobs. Workplaces are going to lose all their good people to the places that actually will accommodate.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It's a tricky thing.
Yeah, a long term, but I think that's the direction it could potentially go in.
Only if people were to subscribe to this idea of rest being important. And I think there's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of romanticizing around the kind of grind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people also really value titles.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people sacrifice their own wellness in the chase of a fancy title. Yeah. So I don't know. It's a nice idea, but we'll see how the next few decades unroll.
Yeah. Yeah. All I know is that it's not going to be able to keep going the way it's going. But it's just about that tipping point that needs to happen.
It is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It would be. Yeah. Well, and I think this is where AI comes in again. Like, it'll start to pick up the gap. Like, it'll start to fill the gaps that are caused by humans working to the limits of our own capabilities, which is a whole other dangerous, scary thing to think about. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know enough about AI to be freaked out about it. I'm just remaining blissfully ignorant for the time being.
That's probably the best way.
Part of that is just, again, because of the privilege of doing what I do. I have no interest or need to engage with AI for what I do, because there's something I can give that AI just cannot. And I think maybe that's what it comes down to, is recognizing what's the value that humans bring, that like an individual person brings with their life and their experience, that some sort of AI algorithm can't.
Well, and what's scary is that within a capitalist structure, what businesses are thinking is, how can we save money?
Exactly.
How can we use technology to save money?
Yeah.
And that's where the scariness comes in. Well, there's all sorts of other things, but yeah.
And I mean, it makes sense why so many people are moving in the direction of starting their own businesses, so they have that kind of control. I mean, the amount of work that goes into running a business, and a lot of business owners run into the same problems, but if it can be done deliberately, I think you end up being in a good position to make those choices. Or for people starting smaller companies where they are building them from the ground up with this in mind. And so it's sort of like maybe the difference between mass market versus sort of more niche boutique places. So maybe there will be less of a trend towards like these big companies and conglomerates, and more like people starting these little operations where people are less interested with getting the title and getting all the money only to wind up not being happy. Some people have to chase that to figure it out, but I think some people are like wise to it. They know it's like, that's just not right. And so people will just want a place where they can go to work, do work in a way that is, allows them to then enjoy their lives, to be deliberate about choosing a job or a career based on the life they want to live, and not just like getting these arbitrary titles and, bonuses and perks and all of that just because they think that'll make them happy. Again, some people that's what they want. They want to be in the big, the big high-rise building and looking over at everybody walking on the street and all the cars and all the fancy stuff and all the expensive whatever. And like, that's what they want. And, that's fine. But I think more and more people are starting to attenuate their expectations about what they can have. I think people are finding it harder to buy into like the quote unquote American dream, or whatever the super hyper version of the American dream is, of where you're like get rich and die trying or whatever.
The reality is that the American dream is out of reach for the large majority of people because cost of living is so high.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and people are now like, oh yeah, that can't happen. So yeah, I feel like we should just retitle this episode to Why Work Sucks.
Yeah.
So do you have any particular ways of resting right now that are especially helpful for you or enjoyable?
No, not particularly. I think for me, I'm in a phase of just I take it day by day, and I have kind of like, I haven't been painting. I haven't been doing anything really creative. I've been doing the acting classes, which kind of get me out. But I'm a bit more focused right now on getting out of the house and getting out of my own head. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And just trying to have more experiences that are outside of myself. How about you?
Yeah, I like that idea too of getting out, and that's something I've been thinking about as well. But yeah, right now I'm just really focused on getting good solid sleep and giving myself time to just reflect, whether that's journaling or meditation. I'm really taking my meditation more seriously these days too. I've actually upped my meditation time this past week to 20 minutes because I'm really enjoying just sitting there and focusing on my breathing. Going for walks, listening to music, exercising can be, as much as it's exhausting, it still feels recharging. Video games, learning new things, reading, writing, hanging out with my cat, sitting outside, spending time with people, talking about things I'm interested in. Yeah, enjoying tea or good food, or just those kinds of things. Pretty straightforward. Playing guitar too. Playing guitar and making music tends to also be, as much as again that's part of my work, it feels like it's more play than work. Right. Which is almost something that could be included here. So I made a note just as I've continued listening to Chase Jarvis's book, Never Play It Safe. He's talking a lot about play, and I was like, that sort of made me think the idea of like active rest can be thought of as play, because that's really what a lot of it ends up being. It's like, it's just playing. But he talks a lot about making play just your life, where even when you're doing work, you make it play. And I'm like, that's an interesting idea. I'm like, I feel like in a lot of cases that's going to be really challenging, but I think it's an interesting idea to play with. The idea of, in the same way that you can make rest just a part of your life, you can make play be a part of your life, not this thing that has to be earned. It's actually something we need. It's how, little baby animals learn how to navigate the world as they play with each other. Right. And humans obviously too, but animals are cuter. Like the little fox cubs I'm trying to save in that game. Yeah. I love foxes. They're very cute. But they're like cat dogs. They're just the funniest little animals.
Cat dogs, yeah. We saw one when we were walking Freya one time. There was a fox because there's like a resident fox that everyone knows about. Her name's Bella. And she wanders around the neighborhood. But it was kind of freaky because foxes are usually quite timid, but she was like chasing us. And so we turned around and came home because I was like a little bit, I wonder if people have been feeding her. And so she's like, a person will give me food. Yeah, I think she has gotten tame because she's so used to being around people now. And maybe that could be it. Yeah, because I feel like I've seen videos where people have foxes, whether they're, I don't know if they're little like fox sanctuaries or something, but they're quite, I think they can be domesticated quite a bit. Like they
again, like they act like little cat dogs. Like
Yeah.
they roll around and they want pets. And so, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But obviously with Freya, you don't want to, you don't want to be interacting with a wild animal.
Exactly.
Awesome. So do we want to each share an intention for the next couple of weeks?
Okay, so my intention is to get into the holiday spirit.
Oh boy.
Is that a weird one?
No, not. I'm just like, I'm just such a Grinch that I'm like, oh, holiday spirit. Like,
I'm
no, that's
so
that's
excited.
probably a good one. That's a good thing to be excited. I dread the holidays and I always can't wait until they're over.
Oh yeah, see, I love Christmas. I love watching Christmas movies. This year, I'm going to go over to my friend's place. We're going to do make some Christmas crafts. Yeah, so that's my intention, is to start doing those things that put me in the holiday headspace.
That's a great intention.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a Grinch, so that will not be my intention.
That's fair.
Maybe this time next year, I will have grown enough as a person to tolerate the holidays.
It could happen. There's someone that I follow on Instagram, and she's an influencer. And she right now, like, she talks every year. She's like, she does not like Christmas. She doesn't even put a tree up or anything. And this year she's like leaning into it. And it's funny to see like her excitement as she's getting into it. Yeah. So maybe that'll happen to you.
Yeah. Maybe down the line. Maybe if I have a family someday. Right now it's just me and my cat, and my cat's not very festive either. I think if I try to put reindeer antlers on her, she'd be really mad. She'd scratch me up.
Yeah.
No, I think my intention for the next couple of weeks is just to continue to try to tap into my intuition and do things from that place. Open myself up to not doubting myself so much and just kind of going for things when I feel that spark of inspiration. Do the Mel Robbins 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and just like do things.
Right.
All right. Thank you everybody for listening. You can send questions and comments to streamofartpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram. We are at Stream of Art Podcast. You can follow us each individually on Instagram as well. I'll just put links in show notes for those. You can join our Discord, and you can listen to our Spotify playlist. There will be a link also for November's. And that's it. So we will see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.